My name is Richard Hasty. I've been working on the B-29 restoration since the year 2000. Been mostly working on the electrical system, wiring, and the guns for the aircraft. I did most of the wiring back here, all of these wiring bundles, wiring for the guns, wiring for the lights, and for the various radios. When we first started, essentially the aircraft was completely stripped of the interior wiring. So I did most of this back here over the years. Right now we're in the cockpit of the B-29. When I first started working on it, it was pretty much stripped. All of the electrical wiring was out of here. Most of the equipment was gone. It was essentially stripped out. There weren't any wires running. A lot of the equipment was taken out when it was scrapped. So started out with the power system, started putting in all of the wiring for the various fuse boxes, trying to get all the lights to work, trying to get the pieces of equipment that we were actually going to get powered to work with their 28 volts. Rigged up some power supplies for them so we could have lights before we had some of this auxiliary lighting in here. And then as over the years, as the various restorers would get something up and get it ready to be worked on, then adding the wiring to that, so we can complete the aircraft and make it look like it did when it flew into combat. And I started out doing plastic models, and then I did radio control models, and now I get to work on a one full-size model essentially. And it's just an honor and a privilege to be able to be associated with an aircraft like this. It's just humbling.
My name is Kevin Kijak. I started with the Museum of Flight a number of years ago with my internship for my museum studies program at Central Washington University. On the plane, I've done a lot of wiring, I've done a lot of painting, of both detail painting and larger scale. Replacing tubes, replacing parts. As the planes moved, we had to take out and reinstall targeting the computers for the Bombardier and the Fire Control Center. So just reassembling parts, bringing stuff in, some research. The biggest thing that I've completed that can be seen here is in the Bombays, the wiring that run from pretty much the entire length of the Bombay, front to back. So when we got the plane, all the wire was rotted out. It was nasty and gross. And so all that needed to be replaced. So I measured it and cut it, and it's in wire bundles about 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch in diameter, and so I had to run all that wire. There's miles of wire, and tied it all together, clamped it all together. So right now we are standing in the forward Bombay of the B-29. There were 2 Bombays, we're in the front one. So I worked on, there's these white wire bundles here, there's 2 of them. There's also a bunch up top as well. When we got this, all of this wire was all rotted out. It was old. The plastic coating had cracked. So all that needed to be pulled out. And then these 2 bundles here, they run the whole length of the plane, well, the whole length of the Bombay. So they go bulkhead to bulkhead. So all of this wire needed to be measured out, and then it needed to be bundled. It's not just one wire, it's a bundle of a number of them. Those are about 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch a piece. So those had to be made. This work is challenging because I'm trying to restore something that doesn't necessarily have pictures. I'm trying to restore something that a guy flying this wouldn't necessarily remember. He might remember the way the chairs were and where they were, but he's not going to remember where the wiring was. It's one thing to see a picture of a plane that did something, and it's another to see the plane that did something and to know what happened in that plane and what people did in that plane. That's what I like. The mechanics of it, I can look that up in a book, but I can sit in the seat where a guy flew this I'm not much older than he would have been, and it's a physical connection.
I'm Hal Lyon. I've been helping to restore T-Square 54 for about 10 to 12 years. I do the electrical wiring, or help with the electrical wiring. There's a number of us doing it. I work on anything and everything from all the way up here in the nose on the Norton bomb site, all the way to the very tail of the airplane and out to both wingtips. So I cover pretty much the whole airplane. I seen an ad in the Boeing newspaper that they needed help, or would like help on helping to restore this B-29 bomber. I turned around and answered the ad and met with the crew chief, and he showed me what he wanted done or would like done, and so I jumped in with both feet. Say, most of the wiring had been stripped out of this airplane because it was scrap at that time. They put it out on a bomb range to use as a target, and since we've recovered it, we're attempting to make as many systems in the airplane functional just like they were the day it rolled off the assembly line. I've been around airplanes a long time. My father was in the Air Force as a kid growing up on different military bases. I can remember sitting there looking out the bedroom window at night and watching the B-52s take off out on the flight line, then watching F-4s take off with their afterburners going and stuff. Aviation is it's a great way of life. I wish I'd had the chance to work on this airplane or these types of reciprocating engine airplanes when I was in the Air Force. I have brought my wife and my kids. I've got a son and a daughter, and they're both married and they have kids of their own, and I have brought them through the museum and brought them in and done personal tours through the airplane. And my oldest granddaughter is now 8 years old. She was probably 3 years old or so the first time I brought her through, and she'd sit there and say, "Grandpa, let's go to your airplane." So put in enough weekends on it that even your grandkids figure that, you know, there's something going on.
I'm Dick Peterson. I've been the volunteer here at the museum specifically on this aircraft since about 2002. I was hired on to do the electrical work, and one thing led to another. And at this point in time, particularly since we've relocated up this way, I've been working on a restoration, or to be more accurate, a facsimile of the radar system that was on board the B-29s in roughly July of 1945. When we got the airplane, this was bare metal. This entire compartment had basically nothing in it. Added the padding, had to build up all of the racks, and all of the boxes that you see, and this is our small secret, are empty. We simply can't find the parts on the surplus market any longer. So we've recreated what it looks like based on historic photographs. Okay, before I was working on the radar, I did do another job throughout the airplane. There's a requirement that the crew has to talk with each other during the flight. So there is the intercom system. Very few people give a thought to it, but it's very essential for the operation of the aircraft. And each crew station has an intercom box, and they can listen to various radios, but more importantly, they can call and talk to essentially any other crew member as necessary. So this involves approximately 14 crew stations and boxes, and all of the wiring that goes out and runs through the aircraft from the front up in the 41 section all the way through to the tail gunner, who is not left out of the process. All of the boxes have now been wired. It's operational, amplifier works, and we've talked to each other on it. So we'll wait and see now when we get power back on the airplane now if it still works. That was just one of the subsystems that had to be recreated from scratch. And by the way, one of the things about working with this is you're working with very talented volunteers who come from all walks. And you put your heads together and you can generally come up and fix a problem if something's missing. We had help from surplus collectors. Some of these boxes came from a group in Portland that we got in contact with. All kinds of people help out. That's another thing that makes it fun to work on restorations. Now, this is really the central fire control area. 3 gunners resided in this area during the early missions. And the key guy was sitting up here in what they call the barber's chair, which swivels along with the upper gun sight. And part of the problem with the upper gun sight is that it is moved. All of the directional information has to be communicated into the fire control system. That comes down through a chair and out the bottom. When we got the aircraft, we had a chair. This is an authentic chair with a new footpiece, but we did not have any means to get the signals out electrically. So we found an old commutator drum with a number of contacts and built and mounted a system which works like the original. It's not as complicated because of a couple of other things we omitted, but it brings all of the fire control information that we do need out and back into our switching boxes. Inside here, we had to improvise a lot of the equipment. This old electrical equipment from the 40s is no longer available. In terms of getting back into this era of aircraft with parts not available, in many cases, you have to either manufacture from prints where they are available, and we do have many, and in some cases you simply have to figure out a way around the problem. We can't fly a perfect aircraft, we have to show what it looked like, and so we improvise. Boxes are built from scratch. You take home panels, you make things in your home shop, but you make them look like the original. In many cases, the functional aspects can be made functional. The rest of it, for example, camera switches on the gun computers. We have no cameras. The switches are there, but they don't communicate to anything at this point. Everything else, though, involves a degree of blending what you can find in the junk pile, refurbish, and making new parts to go around it so that you end up with a system that looks like something that came out of a Wichita plant and was delivered to the Army on January 4th, 1945, as this aircraft was. Well, restoration in general has always been fascinating to me. One of the things is that as one gets older in life, you appreciate the fact that you're standing on the shoulders of your ancestors. And unless we take the opportunity to preserve this material, the folks coming after us will not understand what it took to accomplish the job back in the 40s. And part of my enjoyment of restoration is working with the actual crew members who have come back, and there have been many. I've been at this table for over 3 hours with a radar operator who flew multiple combat missions, learning how things actually worked, what they did. Fascinating. You can't beat it in terms of learning history. And unfortunately, most of these folks are leaving us very rapidly. So we're trying to preserve as much as we can, as fast as we can.
Hi, I'm Herb Phelan, former crew chief for this B-29 T-54. I joined the restoration team several years ago and have spent several years on it now. I've worked on replacing several of the brackets that were used to install the electronics equipment. Because the brackets were missing, the electrical crew was unable to install the devices to complete the systems. So I got out the Boeing drawings and using those recreated the original brackets for the IFF, for example, the voltage regulators, and several others. What we're looking at, this aluminum structure, is the support structure for the radar antenna, which is hung from the bottom of the structure. This was made using only a photograph. So I had to make cardboard mock-up to try to figure out how to construct this thing. And finally, after using aluminum sheet and bending and cutting and riveting, I came up with a reasonable facsimile of the radar antenna structure. Oh, I spent probably 2 or 3 months to fabricate this unit. On the flight deck, there's a gyroscope for the autopilot system, and the original had a box around it to keep you from kicking it, which if you did kick it, that would upset the airplane. So I made this box, recreated the box using the drawings for that, and that is now in place. I noticed when I looked at the APU that it was cocked and the structure that it was mounted on wasn't very good. So we took the APU out of the airplane, and I went and put together a better system of supporting the APU. In the aft section of the airplane behind us here, there's an escape hatch, and the step to get to that escape hatch was missing. It's made out of wood. So again, using original Boeing drawings, I put together that step and installed it. So now if you have to get out of the airplane, you can just open the door and jump out. But you better have your parachute on. Preserving the airplanes is very important from a historical standpoint. And that's what is important to me. The legacy of the World War II efforts and the pilots and crew members who flew on these airplanes.